Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking jerkbaits for fall bass. A jerkbait is one of the best baits that you can throw this time of year to consistently catch fish. And today I want to give you some tips and some of the tricks that we use to really fine tune it and catch the most fish with our time on the water. The jerkbait really is one of the best baits that you can throw in the fall. It is one of 4 categories of baits that can draw that core response, that feed response out of a fall bass. We've talked about some of the others lately. We talked square bills, we talked lipless. The jerkbait is another one that just gets those bites. The difference between a jerkbait and a lot of other things you can throw, a lot of baits will catch a bass. A jerkbait can catch a bass when they are not actively feeding. It can actually trigger them to fire up and eat that bait when they didn't want to. And that is something very special. Now, typically when we're doing these videos, they're pretty bait heavy. I explain my favorite baits, why we make those selections, what each one is for, favorite colors. That's typically what we want to talk about. Today, I actually want to go the complete other direction. Now I'll show you some of my favorite baits, but I'll go much more in depth in the video description. I'll break down our baits so that we can save time in the actual video. I'll break down the baits by category: favorite shallow baits, favorite mid divers, favorite deep divers, the baits that are better in warmer water, the baits that will go all the way through the winter, all the way through the cold water months. Because the jerkbait is one of those baits that you can pick up right now and you can carry that bait all the way to springtime. You can fish it through the entire winter, even when those fish are lethargic and completely shut down. So we will talk a little bit about baits, but most of it will be in the description. What I really want to talk to you guys about today is the gear and the actual technique. We don't usually start with rod and reel. That's where we're starting, and here's why. The jerkbait for me, it's something I've done most of my life. I've thrown a jerkbait as long as I can remember, but I didn't enjoy it. I threw a jerkbait because you had to throw a jerkbait to compete. It worked, it caught fish, but I didn't love it. This is one of 2 styles of fishing: a jerkbait and heavy punching. Those 2 techniques are both techniques that I did because I had to, not because I liked them. And I later discovered that the reason why I didn't like them was a rod. It was just the rod. Choosing the right jerkbait rod completely changes the experience. It not only makes it easier to do, makes it more fun, it actually impacts how many fish you are catching. So I am going to put a ton of emphasis on the rod. Choosing the right jerkbait rod will put more fish in the boat, it will make it more fun, and it will make it easier for you to do. There are what, dozens, if not hundreds of companies on the market that make rods, okay? And out of those, there are dozens that make a jerkbait type rod, but there are only a handful that I've found. Now, I admit I have not fished every rod on the market, but I try. I think I've fished a lot more than most people have. I love experimenting with all sorts of different gear. So I'm always trying new rods, new models, new brands, constantly. Tim and I both just have made a life goal of trying all this equipment so that we have a very educated opinion when people ask. So there are a handful of companies that I think make a really, really good jerkbait rod. The ones that come to mind right off the bat are going to be Megabass, G. Loomis, St. Croix, and Shimano are the 4 that right off the bat each have a model that I really, really like. Now, out of those, for those of you that have followed along, this rod right here is by far my favorite. This is an X-Pride 610 medium. It's a Shimano. I never put this much emphasis on the rod, but it matters that much for this technique. So this is my favorite rod, favorite model, but let's get down to why. I want you to understand this. The reason why this technique is so special, look at this bait. You see how tiny those treble hooks are? Okay, they're very, very small. I need a rod that can land a big bass on those little tiny hooks. Now that narrows it down. There's not very many rods that can do that. But here's the kicker. I still need that rod to have a really stout tip section, a really crisp tip section, so that I can get the action out of the bait. That is what makes it so hard for a company to build a proper jerkbait rod. You need a rod that is fairly rigid right here. You need a stiff tip so that when you snap that rod tip, that bait darts and stops. You get this aggressive, sharp action out of that bait, but you can't do it through the entire rod because you'll bend the hooks out on every fish that you hook. So it's extremely difficult to build a rod that is correct here, that will still absorb all the way through here to keep those fish pinned. That's why I say there's only a handful that I really like for the technique. Now the kicker is you can actually get these rods right now. The 610 medium is probably the most difficult rod in fishing to get because people a couple of years ago realized how good it was for jerkbaiting. So they have been sold out for almost 2 years. Thankfully, they are finally back. You can actually get one now. So let's talk more about the gear. I will sometimes throw it with fluorocarbon, sometimes throw it with braid. I always throw it on a smaller reel. This is an Aldebaran. It's a high-end reel. I really, really like this pairing. This is my favorite combo, set up just like this. So it's an Aldebaran on an X-Pride 10-pound Assassin. That's fluorocarbon. 10-pound fluoro will do almost anything. And I can get away with 12-pound fluoro also. I do that a lot. But that combo is amazing. Now, you may not want to spend that kind of money on a combo, so I've got some tricks for you. Some things that you can do. One is if you stay with a smaller size reel. An Aldebaran is a 50 size. It's a small reel. A standard reel is between a 150 and a 200. They're much, much larger spools. If you stay with a 50, a 70, a smaller compact reel from any brand, you will be much happier throwing these lightweight baits. See, they're not exactly aerodynamic. That's not a shape that just wants to fly through the air like a bullet. They tend to turn and make a mess of themselves, so they're hard to cast. Now they have these little balls that roll back and forth inside of them. That helps a lot. That's a weight transfer. It slams to the back while they're flying. It helps them go straight. But still, they're going to tumble a little bit. So a smaller reel will help a lot. If you're a budget guy, if that's really important to you, you just cannot afford to spend that extra money. I completely understand. There are some things that you can do that will make a big difference. So stay with a smaller size reel again. Switch to braided line. Now, I recommend small braid. 20-pound braid. And a lot of people really struggle with those lighter weight braids because when you backlash, they tend to dig in deep. Well, one thing that you can do is that smaller size reel. You'll do a lot better with that lighter braid. The other thing you can do is just not cast that thing like a bullet. When you spool it on initially, I want you to spool it on there tight. The tighter that braid is on the spool, the less often it will dig in on a backlash. But 20-pound braid tied to a 10 to 12-pound leader, whether that's a fluoro or mono leader. You know, I prefer mono when I'm fishing leaders for shock absorption, for stretch. That setup, braid to leader, will really help you throwing it on any other non-jerkbait specific rod. Again, I threw it on other rods for years and I just made it work. And you can do that. Braid will make a big difference because if you've got a rod like a medium or a medium heavy and it just sort of bows up the entire rod, it's a little more parabolic. That's ideal for keeping fish pinned. It's not ideal for working the jerkbait, getting that crisp movement, but the braid will help with that. The braid will help you hit it harder despite the rod giving a little bit. So if you make short, hard snaps with braid, you don't want to pull, you want to snap it. that will make a huge difference. So braid will be very forgiving, and it will help you make a lot of rods work if you can't get the perfect rod for the job. But again, you can get really, really good rods on a budget. Like this is the X Pride, but the SLX also comes at a 610 medium. The SLX is much, much less expensive. It's going to be a little bit heavier weight. It's not as light and fluid. So if you can afford an X Pride, the difference is there. All day long working that rod, it's much more rewarding to do that on a lightweight rod. It's less work on your arm. But that SLX 610 medium is still that same action. It's really clean and it works really well. So normally we don't talk rods on the front end, but it's really important with this technique because for me, it went from just a thing I had to do to one of my favorite ways to catch a fish. And it was all in the gear. I've got quite a few jerkbait rods because it was something I played with and played with and played with. This is a 110 special, and this one's actually Cece's rod. She absolutely loves this thing. She does great on the 110, and I like it too. I steal hers quite a bit. It's another really good rod. But again, the rod makes a huge difference. Now, technique, obviously critically important. So let me just explain this. When you've got a jerkbait, the way to fish this bait properly, okay? Proper action is not for the bait to swim in the water. When I throw it out, I'll reel a couple handle turns, and that's just to get the bait turned, going the right direction, get the weight transfer system back down into the belly of that bait so that the bait sits correctly in the water. After that, there's no more just reeling this thing. You never want a jerkbait to swim. What you want to do is you want to snap the rod tip. I use a combination of 1, 2, or 3 snaps. So sometimes it's just a pop, sometimes pop, 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 1, 2, or 3, and you mix them up and you pause in between. So what you want the bait to do is dart, pause, dart, 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 pause, dart, dart. But if you're darting and then it starts to swim, then dart, those fish turn off it. We have so much underwater jerkbait footage. It's one of our favorite things to film subsurface. And we have hundreds of clips where that thing rips, that fish comes up and they look at it. And they like to just hover there. The next time it rips, when it pauses, they hit that thing so hard, they strike it right in the head, right there. That's how they eat it, almost every time. But if that thing pauses and they're queued up and they're ready to eat, and the next time it swims a little, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. This fish that's all fired up will just go, they just peel off. Whatever it is in their core response to that darting action, it's completely destroyed when that bait swims. Whatever the thing is that just mesmerizes them is gone. So keep that in mind. So when I work a jerkbait, because obviously if you're ripping, now there's slack. So you have to take some of that up. So what I do is I reel up between rips, I reel up the slack, but I never reel it all the way up. I always leave a little slack laying right on the surface of the water. So I'll go rip, rip, rip. And I actually, as I'm ripping, work both hands. So every time this hand rips the rod, okay, every time that happens, I do a half a handle turn here. And I do them together. So rip, 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 sit. Rip, rip, sit. Rip, rip, rip. If I need to take up extra line in between, I reel it up, but I still leave slack on the water so that the bait is still suspended. Once there's just a little bit of slack left, my first rip will pull the extra slack, then hit the bait. You never want to reel up tight before you rip, because that's when that bait that's sitting perfectly, when you reel up tight, it'll swim a little. And it'll kill it if you've got a follower. So that fine detail makes all the difference. Now the baits, the colors, again, I said we'd keep that part pretty simple. And you can see I get pretty in-depth about my jerkbaits. Some of my favorite baits are, of course, the Megabass Visions. The 110 Junior, the 110, the 110 plus 1, plus 2, and even the bigger options. Size-wise, I'm matching the size of the bait fish. And that's just the Megabasses. Of course, you guys absolutely know how much I like re-ranges. This is that new one, the Deeper Diver. That is incredible. I've already been throwing it a ton this fall. So you've got the standard re-range, if I can get one out of here without killing myself. So you can see the standard re-range, see the lip there? And this is their new one, their medium runner. See the difference? So it'll just go that much deeper. Body shape is identical. Everything else is exactly the same. And then of course, Lucky Crafts, we throw the standard pointer, we throw the flash pointer, a flash pointer and a re-range. Here's a tip for you. A flash pointer and a Jackal re-range, so a Lucky Craft and a Jackal, are both amazing when the water is warmer. So going into fall, they're incredible. They have a ton of flash and a ton of roll, and when the bait fish are moving quick and the bass are ambushing, those baits can smash them. The colder the water gets, I leave that flash pointer behind. I still go with the re-range, and I start switching over to the Megabass, to the Vision. The Vision is just such a refined bait. Now, I will still throw a re-range through the winter, but I throw a Vision more, because as we head into winter, the amount of time that you pause a bait is going to change. So right now, the fish just blew up right behind the camera, guys, chasing the shad. Right now, you'll rip, 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 pause, rip, rip, pause, rip, pause, rip, pause. As winter comes, as the water cools down, and there's not a sure thing. I can't tell you wait 3 seconds when the water is between 50 and 55. I can't do that. You need to experiment for yourself. But as the water cools, the amount of time between rips needs to get longer. So it'll turn into rip, rip, pause, 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 rip, pause, 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 rip, much slower. All the way down to where you'll pop a bait and you'll wait 10, 15 seconds, even longer, and then rip. It's unbelievable though, when the water's cold, the air temps are cold, and you're just slow working that jerkbait, and you just wait and wait and wait. When they hit that thing, it's like in the cold water, they can't afford to miss. They hit that thing so hard, going so fast, that you'll be sitting there half asleep doing these slow rips, and they will just rip your arm. It's unreal. In the dead of winter, there's only a couple of techniques. You can do this, and you can speed crank to get those just freight train bites. Everything else you do is just going to be slow, methodical fishing. No, this will get blasted while you're out there half asleep, freezing cold. It's really, really fun. Couple more tips for you. And then again, most of this info I'm just going to put in the video description. Because there are so many baits, so many colors, so many sizes, it's easier to lay that out in categories, you know, shallow baits, medium runners. Break it out that way where you can see it, because it's too hard if I'm just rattling it out for you. Same thing with the gear. I'll link my exact rod and reel, a budget combo that will work really, really well, and some of the other models that we also really like. If you want something from a specific brand, the best jerkbait rod from each of those brands also. Last thing, when you're snapping that rod, when you're working those baits, the smaller the bill. So say, let's talk about the Megabass. A standard Vision 110. You can hit that bait hard. Pop, pop, pop. The longer the bill gets, when you go to a +1, or you go to a +2, or in Lucky Craft, let's say a pointer 100 compared to a deep diving pointer, a pointer DD, the longer that bill gets, if you hit them hard, you are overworking that bait. It will not work properly. So the longer the bill gets, the smaller the pops. Now again, You still want to hit them, but you don't make it this long pull. I don't take that rod and just snap it. It's just a pop, pop. It's still crisp. It's still a hard, clear snap, okay? But it's not a, you're not doing this thing. It's just a pop, pop, pop. So the +1s, the +2s, a Stacy 90, any of those baits with a bigger bill, sharper, shorter snaps will get you the action you're looking for. The shorter the bill, the more forgiving the bait. You can hit them quite a bit harder. You don't have to worry so much about it. So if you're just getting into this technique, the shorter billed bait will be a lot easier for you to work. It's a lot more forgiving. But if the bait fish are deeper, if the bass are deeper, you need that longer billed bait just to get to the fish. So know how to adapt it. Guys, we did this video in reverse compared to a normal video. We usually wrap it up with gear, but it is so important to get a proper jerkbait rod. And if you can't get one, make that switch to really light braid. Learn to tie that connection knot so you can add a mono leader for some shock absorption. Because if you put heavy braid on and you hook them on these little hooks, you're bending them out every time. But if you get a mono leader in there, it'll stretch some. You use a more parabolic rod, it'll give, and you can still get those fish into the boat. But if you can afford it, this is one of those techniques where the right gear goes a really, really long ways. Guys, I hope this helps you. The jerkbait, again, it will start working now. It will work all the way through fall, all the way through winter, into the spring. It's an awesome technique. Dial it in now so you can enjoy it all the way through this half of the year. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.